Well, welcome to our all-member meeting. I'm delighted with our agenda tonight. We're going to be first talking to a candidate, I shouldn't call him a candidate, an educator who accepted the invitation to apply for the case method study in civics education. And Joshua David Hall is here to talk to us about how it's going, what it was like to train, and what he and his students have learned so far, and what his expectations are. So we're very glad that he's joined us this evening in his very busy schedule. I'm going to introduce him in a minute. And following Joshua Hall's presentation, we're going to review each of the ballot questions. And Lucy Kennedy is going to lead that. And this is a very clear reminder that this is a nonpartisan forum. And the purpose of this is to come to an understanding of what the ballot questions are and what the pros and what the cons are for each of the questions. All right. Good. Well, I guess we're being recorded. Is that clear, Lucy? Yes. Okay, I see the red button. Thank you. My name is Ramel Pulitzer, and the League of Women Voters of Central Berkshire County is just about 2 years old. We were finally recognized after being a committee for several years, but just as we were, COVID took over, and we have gone from very popular meetings at Stockbridge Library to Zoom format. And we have a good core group of very interested members who meet at least every month and present every month. So we're delighted with our civics education presentation this evening. You may know that the League of Women Voters of Massachusetts put civics education before the Massachusetts legislature in 2018 and finally had that a law passed that would allow civics education and actually mandate that it be taught in 8th grade and then again in upper school across the state. Since 2018, it had a rough go of it to start because one, schools closed because of the pandemic, and second, it was underfunded. That has been corrected this year in the legislature. The budget went up by a considerable amount, and that hurdle has been jumped. And meanwhile, while the legislature was figuring this out, the State League met with 15 different chapters and decided how to support civics education across the state. From Martha's Vineyard to the Berkshires, there were a core of us who looked at what works and what doesn't work with science fairs and other ways to celebrate what teachers are doing, support them, and celebrate what students are able to accomplish. And one of the leagues in Greenwich, Connecticut, has recruited a Dr. Moss from Harvard to teach the case method approach to education. And Dr. Moss is no longer directly affiliated with this, but at the college level at Harvard, his students would work on one case a week and cruise through a very significant book that I have right here in front of me and understand how democracy was formed by a sense of legislative discussions, literally conflicts in many cases. And the point of the outcome was to see when the conflicts were constructive and see what came out of them and be able to see both sides of every issue. So I was just thrilled when we finally found Joshua David Hall, a history teacher at Lee High School, the department chair, who agreed to take this course for teachers supported by the League of Women Voters. And he took time out of his summer last August trained in addition to his amazing knowledge that he already has. Joshua went to the Massachusetts College of Liberal Arts, and he went to Norwich University. He worked with Barbara Allen as an archivist at the Stockbridge Library for many years and still continues to work there on Saturdays. He is a very busy individual, and I'm thrilled that he's come, and we wanted to know how it went in August. How's it going this year in school now that you've had a chance to settle in? And I want to thank you in advance of your talk for being with us. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Ramel. Before I get started, I would just like to say to the League of Women Voters, thank you very much for supporting me and for your backing in the opportunity to take this particular course on Dr. Moss's case study initiative. It was quite a learning experience, and I'm happy to be here this evening to share my background and to share what I have learned and how I plan on using that material going forward in this academic year and going forward. As Ramel mentioned, back in 2018, the Massachusetts Board of Education, the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, changed the curriculum and put in the idea of having civics education in both 8th grade and then again in high school. And it is something that I strongly agree with. And I'm happy or proud to say that at Lee Middle and High School, we had jumped the gun. We actually, for over a decade before 2018, really had talked about the importance of civics education in the high school. And we were sitting in a department meeting a number of years ago and realized that, yes, taking US history is a requirement. And yes, our students are taught about the beginnings of the United States, the idea of the Constitution, Bill of Rights, and various different pieces like that. However, what we found was our students were headed out into the community and going off to university and not really having a full grasp of what it was that they were headed out into and what their rights were and what their civic obligation was in terms of the next generation of voters. So what we decided was that we needed to kind of revamp the American government course that we had at that particular time, and we made it a graduation requirement. And we strategically put it in junior year because what better year to kind of get the students as they're turning 17, going on into 18. So sometime between junior year or senior year, every graduating student at Lee Middle and High School was required to take this American government course. And I think that nicely fit in with what I learned about this past summer. So that idea of civic engagement, that idea of being aware of, yes, we have a constitution. What does that actually mean? How did we get there? What has that involved? And where do you fit into that particular picture? And all of those questions being asked, sometimes you have those students that are questioning, what is the purpose of government? Why should I listen to the government? What is going to happen? Why is this important? And that's exactly why we decided that we were going to have this class. So how does that look going forward? Well, now that there is an 8th grade component for civics, and there's also a high school component for civics in order to meet the requirements for the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. This particular program fits in in perfectly, because it allows the students to look at themselves, and it allows the students to look at the history of democracy, the history of civic education, and how it affects them and how it will affect them going forward. So this past August 20th, I had the distinct pleasure of joining well over 300 educators from all over the United States via Zoom to take part in Dr. David Moss's program on the case study method. As Ramel mentioned, this was an idea, a method that he had developed while he was a professor at Harvard University, and he has since put this together as a class that he teaches at Harvard, as well as what he has done through Harvard Business College. So the program that day was set up as an opportunity to learn about what the case study method is. And really what he did is he gave us as educators the opportunity to become students and go through the process of what working on the case study method looks like. So like any good educator, he gave us homework to do beforehand. There were a couple of videos that we were required to watch, some reading that we needed to do. And part of this was just kind of giving us a background of what the program is. So some of the videos that we watched talked about how he developed the case study method, why he developed it, and how he uses it in the courses that he teaches, and look at it as a way to engage students and an alternative way to teach history, to teach government, civics, and so on. And then there were a couple of examples that had been reported of how in the past different teachers have used this in their classrooms at the secondary level. And all of that was excellent preparation to go forward on August 20th to meet with Dr. Moss and his staff and come together with the various educators, as I said, from all over the United States to learn about what the case study method is all about. So the idea behind the case study, and as a high school student, having taken college preparatory, advanced placement classes, and so on, I was not unfamiliar with the idea of a case study as an advanced placement student. My teacher at the time, we had a case study that we would do at least one a month, if not two sometimes. And it started from the very beginning, starting off with John Smith and Pocahontas and going all the way. I remember the last one that we did was about Harry Truman and the dropping of the atomic bomb in 1945. So it ran quite a lengthy area, and the information, the materials that are made available to us through Dr. Moss and through the Harvard Business College are very similar in that it runs the entire gamut of US history. So from the colonial period through the Revolution all the way up to the 20th and actually the 21st century. And it was very interesting listening to a number of the educators beforehand and those that were at the training that clearly were familiar with Dr. Moss and what he has done in terms of the case study method. There are some educators who their entire curriculum for their American government course, their advanced placement US history course, or even what they use for their students who may be in college preparatory level or on a lower level, this is all they use for their curriculum. They specifically use his case studies in order to look at history because it hits on all of these important highlighted terms throughout the course of US history. And it was an interesting revelation because I really hadn't thought about just using the case studies in the curriculum. And yet, after having gone through the course and having looked at the various different case studies that were available, it made perfect sense. It's not something that I felt as though I was ready to rush into it, the following week with school starting. But it's definitely something that, as I go through making my lesson plans and so on for my U.S. History 2 students, I have stopped and I think about, okay, what case study is coming up next? So Dr. Moss's process is pretty straightforward, and it's not complicated at all, which is wonderful because, as I said, this is a method that has been used for students who are at an AP level and for students who are in special education classes and so on, that have issues with reading or with English language arts and so on. So it can be tailored very nicely to be open to all students, which is excellent. So what he does is he presents a particular topic. So, for instance, civil rights was the topic that we were, as students, looking at that particular time. And there's a reading, probably at most 20 pages. So you have to go through the reading. And as you go through the reading, what it does is it gives you a condensed history of that particular topic. It's starting off in terms of civil rights. It starts off with 1619, with the arrival of the first enslaved people going forward. And it hits on all of the major issues dealing with civil rights, with slavery, and so on, going from that point forward, but in a condensed version so that you're getting as much information as you can with enough detail that you understand what he's talking about. So the arrival of the first enslaved people, going on to Nat Turner, then talking about Harper's Ferry and John Brown, what takes place there, and then Lincoln, the Emancipation Proclamation, and then Reconstruction, what's going on in Reconstruction, and how that fits into the whole picture. The major changes that happen between Reconstruction and the turn of the century, and then Booker T. Washington's meeting with Teddy Roosevelt after he becomes president of the United States in 1901. From there, going forward, looking at the advent of the NAACP, and then eventually coming up to Martin Luther King Jr. and the march in Birmingham, Alabama. So the case study gives all of this interesting history about this whole course of events over nearly 300 years, and talks about what's going on, what's happening on both sides of the political aisle, how it all builds up and how it's changing. And then it focuses on what's going on in Birmingham, Alabama, and what is happening with Martin Luther King Jr. and at that particular time. And as you go through and you read, there are a couple of key things that Dr. Moss asks his students to do. And part of that is, as you're reading, what did you know, what didn't you know? As you're reading, what is the vocabulary that you see that you understand versus the vocabulary that you might not quite understand? He poses to the students, how do you think people are feeling it? So looking at it from the perspective of a student, but also looking at it from a historical perspective, and going through and posing questions about, so what's happening now, what's going on, how have things changed? We've just talked about a time period, let's say, so Reconstruction. So we're talking right after the Civil War, what's going on after the Civil War up to 1870. So just a 5-year period, what's happening, and this leads to all sorts of interesting discussions because, you know, sometimes in class, because you have a limit of how much time you can spend on certain topics, yes, there was Reconstruction and things were happening, and you have the Freedmen's Bureau, what's going on with that. But sometimes little pieces get left out, and there's in the case study that he gives just enough detail that it reveals new things for the students. So what's going on with Reconstruction? Are members of the African American population in the North and South? What is happening? Are they, you know, in terms of 13th, 14th, 15th Amendment? All of these pieces are being added into it, so it grows and grows. So being able to have conversations with the students about what's happening, what are the changes, is a great way to get them engaged, to understand, you know, how the Constitution is changing. And as the student going through the training, you know, we had people who teach middle school, high school, and within high school, as I said, at various different levels. And even some of us as educators are kind of going, geez, I probably knew that, or maybe I didn't know that. And this is an excellent way of giving out information in terms of what are some of the changes that, again, looking at Reconstruction in terms of the whole idea of civil rights, that following the Civil War, with the passage of the 13th and eventually 14th and 15th Amendment, there were many people in the South who were former slaves who were actually doing quite well, that they were able to become business owners, that they were owning property, that they were making quite a good living, they were involved in politics, they were being elected into positions. And then all of a sudden, there was this major change in the 1870s and 1880s, and it didn't start in the South. It started in the North over concerns over money, really, is what it boils down to. Commerce is where it comes into. And there's this whole dynamic shift that happens that, you know, all of a sudden it's a complete change because of the way, you know, things are usually presented. So it was amazing to be able to have these conversations and to go through in small groups and talk about questions that Dr. Moss had given us to talk about and go forward. So it's great to be able to have conversations, to be able to go through and analyze these different events. And then at the end, as everybody comes back together and everybody is writing notes and so on, Dr. Moss is talking about, okay, so think about this. Here's the situation. You are Martin Luther King Jr. You have been, you've been asked to have this peaceful protest. You're going to march across the Pettus Bridge. And politically, you know, there are different people the president has called. There are other individuals who you've been talking with who have asked you not to do this, or, you know, potentially you can cross the bridge but turn around and go back, and so on. So it builds up. You have all this information, and then he poses the question, very simple question: what do you do? How do you move forward? And it really makes you stop and think about, my goodness, you know, after having gone through all of this information, having gone through the history of how we got to this point, having analyzed all of the information and so on, what would you do? How do you move forward in this particular scenario? And he leaves it at that. There's no information about what happens next. It's meant to kind of be this kind of cliffhanger situation. What do you do? And do you turn around? Do you move forward? So on and so forth. And so he posed that question to us, and a couple of us responded as to, I think I would turn around. I think I would do this and that. And then, of course, you move on and say, okay, well, in the end, this is what happened. This is how the situation played out. And as an educator, and also as a parent of two middle school students who will soon be joining me in high school, these are the type of questions that I think really being able to ask the students of their opinion. What would you do? Yes, it's a hypothetical question. The situation has already happened, but being able to put them in that position and say, look, this is what has happened. This is the information. You've now analyzed all of this information. What decision, if you were in this position, what would you do? And I think it's a very, very important question, because not only is that what would you do then, but if the situation were to present itself now, equally, what would you do now? Maybe you're not the leader. Maybe you aren't, that core political figure. But as an American, as somebody who is voting, somebody who is standing up for people's rights or whatever, how would you look at this particular situation? And so getting them to think about that, getting them involved, asking them the questions is an excellent way to engage them and hopefully try to kind of make it more real to them. That was one of the first things at the beginning of the school year that I said to my students. In the past, I've taught freshmen, and so they're straight out of middle school. They are kind of searching for themselves still. Now I have juniors and seniors in my class, and I said to them, I said, I want you to put aside all of your predispositions in terms of history. I said, I had you as freshmen, which I did. I had most of these students as freshmen. I said, that's 2 years ago. We're 3 years out. Think about the history that we're talking about this year. We're talking about the 20th and 21st century. Huge change, and it's your lifetime. This is your living history, and this is not only your living history, but your parents and your grandparents. So being able to bring forward information and topics like Martin Luther King and so on through the case studies, looking at other time periods, but being able to bring it back to them, I think really makes it pop for them. It gets them to think, because the people that we're talking about, or the people that they can talk to about what's going on, are still alive. Mm-hmm. My students think that that I'm ancient, that I am old, and I can be very convincing to them about in talking about different things in class. But what we're going to talk about, you've lived, or somebody that you can still talk to lived through these things, these events. And so being able to talk about the changing in voting age, how did that change? Talking about Vietnam or Korea. All of these things are going to be addressed by some of the various different case studies. And I think it's excellent. I personally, as their educator, am very much looking forward to using this information and this method to get them engaged, to get them more involved in what's going on, because it's important that they understand it, and quite frankly, it's just important that they care. That, again, going off, being the next set of voters, there's an awful lot that's going to be in their hands.
Yes, there is. Yes, there is, Josh. I'm delighted to hear your synopsis of how you're bringing it into your classroom. And have you seen some responses from the students? Are they willing?
So in terms of the students, we've done one case study so far. We did the anthracite coal strike of 1902. And with that, it was interesting. It was a slow start, but I asked I have 3 classes that I've been using this information with. And I said, how best do you want to do this? How do you think would be the easiest way to move forward? And I said, I can assign you bits and pieces and we can go forward and we can analyze it together. I can say, here's 20 pages, go ahead and read it and we'll come back together at some point and we'll discuss everything and process it, however you wish to go forward. And one of the nice things is, as part of the resources that we received I would say as a gift, having gone through the training, is not only do we have the readings, the case studies themselves readily available, but Dr. Moss has given us all of his notes. So as we go through and we talk about the various different events that pertain to that particular case study. So in this case, the various different strikes that have been going on, the history of labor movements going forward. We have all of Dr. Moss's notes so that we can go through and make sure that we create discussions based on those notes that he has. And then we also have discussion questions that we're able to go over. So my students found it very helpful to kind of, how do you eat an elephant? Well, you eat an elephant one bite at a time. So breaking it down into sections, going through, making sure that they understand the vocabulary and analyzing everything together worked quite well. And with the 3 classes, I had one class that moved at a slower pace than the other 2, but were equally as engaged as the others. And I had a very positive response. They seemed to enjoy it. I had 2 choices. I could have done the anthracite coal strike, or I could have done the food processing. So Upton Sinclair and Jungle and different things like that. I suppose for more of the shock value, I probably should have gone with the food aspect of things. But either one, I think, seemed to gather their attention because it talked about child labor. It talked about the development of labor unions. It talked about going from working 6 days a week for 14, 15 hours to how do you get to a 5-day work week or an 8-hour work day and so on. So things that in some cases they can relate to, and what is the purpose of a labor union? Why do we need them? What is the benefit of something like this? So having all of those pieces, it popped so that they had a good understanding of what was going on.
Well, thank you so much, Joshua. I have really thrilled that it came through as clearly. The league was invited, league members, to hear Dr. Moss give a case study. We were invited to read a 20-page, and I'm not sure everyone did, but we were listening the whole time not as participants. And it was a rigorous agenda that he sets with quick questions, and he expects a lot of his students. But as you say, they have walked the walk to go through the steps to get to the understanding, which I think is marvelous. We need to move on. I would love to, if there a final comment you'd like to make, Joshua, before we get to our ballot questions. I just can't thank you enough.
And I can't thank all of you enough because it was fantastic to have the opportunity to do this and to have something that is causing my students to be engaged in civic civic understanding, civic education, with all sorts of aspects of diversity, equity, inclusion, and being able to cover all aspects of education. So thank you.
Excellent. It looks like there might be a question or two before we move on. Yes, Stephanie. Oh, there's a clap. That's very nice. Betty Farbman.
Yeah, I'm sorry I was late. I don't know why. I had it come to me as a 6 o'clock Zoom, so I apologize for missing, because I really was very interested in hearing this, Joshua. My name is Betty Farbman. I'm part of this group and have been for a while. And I'm wondering, because of course we always think ahead, and you may have talked about this, about how we would work with you to help offer this opportunity to other of your colleagues, and how you think it could be implemented further, and if you think there's value to that.
So there's absolutely value, and as part of the training, Dr. Moss asks for other people that you feel may be interested in doing this. And my colleague who teaches advanced placement U.S. history, I think that this would be invaluable to him as well. So I added his name to Dr. Moss's list. So it would be excellent to be able to have the entire staff, or at least those of us that work with US2 and AP US history, to be able to use this, because it is, in my opinion, a fantastic resource and fits in perfectly with both the CP honors and AP curriculum.
Great. Well, we'll be back to you about that person to do a nomination, right, Ramel?
Absolutely. And we really grateful. I understand your principal is very much in favor of you doing it, which is also another step in the process, that we really want to bring all the schools we can on board with this. And I really thank you for your positive response, because to hear good news from the school systems is like music to our ears. It's long in far few between, and this just sounds like a great way to engage students before they get to voting age. And if they're interested in registering to vote, they don't need to wait any longer when they're 17. They can register when they're 16.
Uh-oh. Ramel froze.
She did.
So, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Joshua, I'm going to let you go, but I hope you would like to stay on and listen to our conversation about the pros and cons of the ballot questions. Maybe a case study involved might be brewing in here.
I see, before we close this portion of the program, I see Marietta has a question.
Oh, thank you, Lucy.
My question is, from the way you speak, Josh, I get the feeling that you have a very open classroom and that there's a lot of give and take, and students can speak in a positive way, in a maybe way, in a negative way, so that you get a broad range of opinions. Am I right?
Yes, and that's part of what Dr. Moss talks about is having that, really to have a safe and open classroom where students have the opportunity to agree or disagree, but to do that in an appropriate way, so that there can be an open conversation about what's happening going through the process.
And is there an opportunity for the students to talk to their folks about, hey, this is what we're reading, this is what we're talking about, what do you think?
So there's always an opportunity for them to do that, and it's something that I encourage. unfortunately, I don't know how much parental buy-in I have sometimes, but it is something that was brought up. For example, open house. We have parent-teacher conferences coming up in about 3 weeks. So it's something that I will mention to them as well, so that they're aware of what's going on. When the students brought home their syllabus, I made sure I did a whole write-up about the case study method, and that it would be something that we would be doing this year. So it was even included in the syllabus. So
my last question is, do you just have single periods or do you have back-to-back periods? Because to me, what you're doing is very exciting, and my tongue would be going.
I have 3 different periods. So I teach 6 periods this year, and so three of my classes are doing this. So.
Okay, so you have enough time in a 45-minute period to cover this stuff.
So yes, but it takes this first case study. It took me a week to get through, to make sure that we had all the information to analyze, to have conversation and so on. It took a week, but I was willing to do more than a week if it needed to be. Some of the colleagues that I was talking with when I went through the training talked about how, depending on the class, they may take longer than that. So.
I think it's great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I hope that they're going to score very well on their whatever standard test they're going to have to do. Because once the students are thinking for themselves, I think you're teaching them lots of wonderful life lessons here. Any other questions? Thank you for that question, Marietta. Thanks, Betty Farbman. We are very sorry about the misunderstanding of the start time for tonight. But we're now to the second phase. But I hope you'll stay on, Joshua, if you have the time. Lucy?
Hi, everybody. I'll try to go through the portion of this meeting I have as quickly as possible. But before I do that, there's some of you that I don't know. So I would appreciate it if you could unmute for a minute and just briefly introduce yourselves. I'm Lucy Kennedy. I'm from Lenox, and I've been a member of this chapter of the League of Women Voters since it formed. Marietta, you want to go next?
Sure. My name is Marietta Rapetti-Cause. I'm from Pittsfield. I've been a member of the Williamstown League of Women Voters for 20 or more years. I am so grateful to the League for helping us perpetuate the Real Women's Writing Essay Contest that started more than 32 years ago. It ended about 3 years ago, but thanks to the Williamstown League of Women Voters, it went on for decades. Thank you.
Thank you, Marietta.
And Michael, as one of our brave male members, would you like to say something to introduce yourself?
Sure, I'm Michael Pulitzer and I live in Stockbridge, and I'm always like to see whatever we can do to get people to vote.
Jocelyn, how about you?
Hi, I'm Jocelyn Chapman and I live in Pittsfield. And I have known about this for a while, but I wasn't getting the emails and I just got one. So I got the paperwork and I'm voting tonight. So.
Terrific. Yeah, I should have asked everybody to say whether they voted yet or not. Stephanie, how about you?
Can't hear you, Stephanie. You're on mute.
No, you're not muted, but I can't hear you. Okay, Stephanie, you're not muted, but I can't hear you. You may not have turned the volume up on your computer. All right. Susan, if you want to unmute, maybe we'll move on to you. Susan, you have to unmute.
Yeah, I did. Me?
Yep.
Oh, okay. I'm Susan Morris. I live in Stockbridge. I joined this local chapter. I belong to the Tuesday Club, and we had invited the then president of the local chapter, which wasn't quite a chapter yet, to speak with us. And she did a great job of recruiting people. So they got me. And so I joined the board and been taking notes as the secretary. And I think, as Michael put it, getting people out to vote, we found that there's a lot of people who are registered, but they clearly don't all vote. And why is that? I don't know. I don't know. We were at a naturalization ceremony recently, and it was so refreshing to see so many people so eager to vote. They couldn't wait to get their hands on that application and participate in the next, we have slides, and participate in the next election. So maybe there's hope. Maybe there's hope. I think groups like this need to gin up more interest.
Okay, excellent. Betty, you want to just say hi?
Hi, I'm Betty. I've been a member since we became a chapter a couple of years ago in the pandemic. And I'm most excited about the civic education initiative. So I'm so excited to hear Josh. I was thrilled that we had somebody join that program. It seems stellar.
And Amy?
Yeah, hi, I'm Amy Cooper. I live in Stockbridge too, and I have been with this league since the beginning of the beginning. And it's my pleasure to do so.
And Anne?
Do you see me?
What?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I can hear you.
Okay, Ann Kreider from Williamstown. I've been a league member for maybe 40 years, maybe 50 years. And I was interested in the education part that you were offering. So that's why I'm here.
Terrific. Thank you very much. And CTSB is Rich from CTSB, who is recording this meeting so others can share it. And Josh, thank you very much for an excellent presentation. I will now attempt to screen share and take you as quickly as I can through the mass voter propositions. Has everybody voted already?
No.
From Stephanie, I'm just interrupting. Stephanie Bradford, did you get your volume up?
I don't know. Can you hear me now?
Yes. Go ahead and introduce yourself, Stephanie. Okay. That's great.
This is a new laptop, so I didn't realize that the speakers weren't on. First time I've used it for Zoom. So I live in Stockbridge. You can see my husband, Carl, here.
Hello.
And I am not currently a member of the League of Women Voters, although I grew up with a mother who was very active back, I don't know, 75 years ago, was a very active member of the League of Women Voters. Carl's daughter is also a teacher in high school, so I was very interested to hear what Josh had to say about this program, so we could pass some information on to her. And I'm also really interested in the ballot questions. So I'm glad you can hear me now.
Terrific. Welcome all. All right, I'll try to go through this as quickly as I can. You all should have gotten your very own, sorry, it's kind of blurry, little red book here, which has at least 3 of the questions in it. But question number 4 didn't come through in time for them to get it in the booklet. So we'll try to cover that. Question 1 is also known as the Fair Share Amendment. And a yes on question 1 would amend the state constitution. So there is an additional, and I'm going to see if I can make this a little smaller here. There we go. would amend the state constitution so an additional 4% tax could be charged on the portion of incomes over $1 million.
About the questions on the, okay, I'll listen to it and tell you how to vote.
Well, we're extending our nonpartisan stance into the questions. So I'll give you the pros and cons, but we won't make a recommendation. We're happy to discuss, but we really can't recommend. Anyway, it's subject to appropriation by the state legislature, but is to be used on education and transportation. The pro is that per the name, state taxes are currently a flat 5% on all. So the more you make, the smaller the percentage of your income is going to taxes. This is backed by Democrats and progressives, teachers unions in particular. And the left-leaning think tank Mass Budget and Policy Center claims the amendment won't cause the wealthy to leave the state or slow growth. Generates, if those millionaires don't leave, $1.2 billion in additional revenue on a base of about $41.1 billion. Those opposed, the con, say that it almost doubles the tax rate, is injurious to small business, and it hits one-time sales, things like sale of a home, a business, and inheritance hard, because that's treated as ordinary income. The con is supported by the Small Business Representative Coalition to stop the tax amendment. The people who are opposed to it say there is no guarantee it will be spent on education and transportation. And the right-leaning think tank, the Pioneer Institute, claims the proposition is a gift to other states that will drive population and businesses to tax-friendlier states such as New Hampshire and Florida. Questions on that one? Okay, we'll move along. Question 2 is on regulation of dental insurance. A yes would require dental insurance providers to spend at least 83% of premiums on member dental expenses or improved care, not on administrative expenses. The pro is that it delivers better value to consumers for dental insurance. The percentage requirement is similar to that now in place for medical insurance. It's backed by the Committee on Dental Insurance Quality, which as far as I can tell is a group of dentists, and the American Dental Association. They claim it won't increase rates because there's a cap on what percentage rate increase can occur in insurance in the state. Those opposed say it would cause a 38% increase in premiums based on a study by the Committee to Protect Public Access to Quality Dental Care, which was funded by the National Association of Dental Plans, largely Delta Dental. Don't you love these names, by the way? The Committee to Protect Public Access to Quality Dental Care is mostly dental insurers. Interesting, right? The report goes on to argue this would cause businesses and individuals to drop dental insurance coverage. Questions on that one? Okay. Question 3.
I had a question on.
Yep. Yes. Okay, I'll move on to question 3. Question 3 is on the expanded availability of licenses for the sale of alcoholic beverages. A yes would allow chain stores to expand beer and wine sales to more locations while capping the availability of full liquor licenses. The pro is that it would offer consumers more options for purchase of beer and wine, i.e. chain stores and convenience stores, while still protecting against underage drinking by prohibiting auto scanner checkout. It also allows, and Mass is apparently the only state that didn't allow, out-of-state driver's licenses for ID, and caps all alcohol, in other words, hard liquor licenses at 7. This is largely sponsored by package store retailers. The con is that it's only a superficial advantage for consumers at the expense of unfair fines to retailers other than package stores, because the fines, if they break any of the rather strict procedures in place to protect against underage drinking, is that it's based on total sales. So if you're like a grocery store chain offering wine and beer and you sell it improperly, your fine is based on all of your sales. Whereas if you're a package store, all you're selling is liquor anyway. Outlawing auto scan doesn't recognize technological capabilities at point of sale. These changes would decrease the number of full liquor licenses retailers can own. No is supported by large chain stores, although it's kind of telling that it's largely funded by a Maryland-based outfit called Total Wine, which already has 7 stores in Massachusetts. This one I really couldn't figure out, so I did some extra research. Because I couldn't figure out, why would local package stores back making distribution more available at competitors like convenience stores and chain stores? Apparently, the deep background on this, because of this Total Wine and some other maybe in the future competitors, they feared there would be a kind of the sky's the limit distribution. So if they could cap it in some way, they decided that was better than letting it take off in an unlimited way. And the point of sale, not being able to auto scan, and the fines still favor local package stores. So I can't really tell you what to do on this one, but a yes is kind of local package stores. No is kind of mostly this Maryland-based chain store.
It seems to me that if yes is that the local package stores could have more licenses.
Correct.
Okay.
Conceivably, but there is a limit on how many they can have.
Right, and it's incremental. It's going to increase over the years.
Yeah, you got it.
So my question is, they can't scan the cans and bottles when you go through a checkout?
You can't auto scan it. You can't self checkout. You know,
okay.
You have those self checkouts. Well,
okay.
I guess the thinking is that it's that would be heaven for underage drinkers.
Okay.
Yeah. But the Total Wine and the other chain stores argue, well, they can deal with that through current technology. But the
package story about driver's licenses.
Currently, you cannot use an out-of-state driver's license to show your ID to buy liquor in Massachusetts. And we are the only state that prohibits the use of out-of-state driver's licenses. And again, this seems to be some of this horse trading, because the package store people were for it. That probably means they said, okay, we'll allow this, and because that's okay with us as long as this, Total Wine outfit can't come in and take over all our sales. I'm completely making that up, but I think that's kind of.
So I'll make a comment that Connecticut and New Yorkers can come up and buy cannabis, but they can't buy liquor.
You got it. Okay. Now they will be able to if this passes. Okay, question 4 is one that did not make it into the Red Book. And it's being called the Work and Family Mobility Act. But a little more simply, it entitles, I don't want to say, it entitles undocumented immigrants to get a driver's license. However, they have to be documented enough to show a foreign driver's license, a passport, something that identifies them in order to get said license. The reason it didn't make it onto the Red Book was because it was passed in the legislation. It was passed by the legislature, and it was all set to go into law, but Governor Baker vetoed it because he was concerned that the DMV couldn't sort out the documentation to keep these individuals getting driver's license from being automatically registered to vote. And at least right now, you have to be a US citizen to vote. So that was that, and you would think that would be the end of it, but no, this was such a popular item with the legislature that they overrode the governor's veto. So once again, you would think that would be the end of it. But a citizen group, which again has one of these names that I forgot to write down here, got it on the ballot to override of the governor's veto. In other words, there's a citizen group that is so concerned about immigrants getting driver's licenses that they want you to vote no to override the legislation that said yes, even to the extent of overriding the governor's veto. Now pause and see if that's clear. So a yes vote keeps the legislation that allows non-documented immigrants to get driver's licenses. And it's called the Work and Family Mobility Act because it means people have to have a license, have to have insurance in order to, or can get a license and have to have insurance in order to drive. And obviously most people in Massachusetts have to drive to have a job. So it'd be a big plus. But the cons, as indicated by the group that is sponsoring this question, believe that like Baker, that the DMV can't keep up with the documentation, and that it's really to some degree, gee, they shouldn't get a break kind of thinking. Questions on this one?
So if you're a non-citizen, but you have to show that you're a resident of Massachusetts in order to get...
You have to show you're a resident, and you also have to have some other kind of documentation, like a foreign passport or a foreign driver's license. You can't do it with just a utility bill.
Okay, so if you're a citizen of another country,
right,
and a residence in Massachusetts would be a utility bill.
Yeah.
So if you're a student here from some other country, this would make a lot of sense.
Yeah, and if you're a student, you probably have a student visa, so you can use that.
As a retired school counselor, I support this legislation strongly.
Yeah, Marietta, I'm gonna stop you there just because we're trying to make this strictly informational, and I applaud your sentiments, but we're trying to not get into too much advocacy one way or the other as part of our non-partisan stance.
Okay, let me just say.
Questions are fine, but lobbying pro or con, not so much.
Okay, let me ask a question. Wouldn't enabling immigrants to have licenses enable them to use more time, more family time than commuting time? Wouldn't it also create more safety on the road rather than?
I'm going to have to say that's very artfully done, but I would call that lobbying.
Okay. I'm lobbying for it. Enough said.
Good for you. But if are there any questions? I mean, again, this is a little confusing because passed by the legislature, vetoed by the governor, veto overridden, and now it's being taken directly to the people. So a yes means what the legislature wanted to have happen goes through. A no means you're blocking what the legislature wanted to have happen.
Well, I'm just sort of smiling because now they can't buy liquor. And if this goes through, they would be able to buy liquor.
There you go. Hey, there you go. So it all works together. And they could get decent dental insurance.
Oh, you're on thin ice there,
and on it goes. Well, the con seems to assume that if you get a driver's license, you can go register to vote.
No, it's more straightforward than that, Susan. In Massachusetts, we have automatic voter registration, which means that if you just dropped into Massachusetts from Mars and you wanted to get you're a US citizen with your birth certificate and your social security number, and you wanted to just add a driver's license to your documentation, they would say, take your eye test, here you go, you're all set. And oh, by the way, unless you strenuously eject and fill out this documentation, you're also registered to vote. Congratulations.
But people who are here on green cards should have no trouble getting a driver's license. They're not citizens.
Correct. That's absolutely correct.
So I don't know. I remember I did register to vote in Massachusetts when I got a license, because she said, oh, do you want to do that too? And I said, sure. But is there not something, I think when I got my real license, the thing they call the real license, I had to bring all kinds of stuff. I had to bring a birth certificate and all kinds of other crap to prove that I was really eligible for that sort of thing.
Well, the real ID is the one that the airlines are now requiring.
Right.
And that's, a whole different kettle of fish.
Yeah. But that requires all this other documentation, but just getting a regular driver's license doesn't?
No.
See, we put the screen share on the column on the left the way it was before in case we need to refer back to it. Or so we can see each other. Okay, there's one more non-binding. These are not ours. Are you going to do the non-binding questions?
Yes, although I think, let's see, I have to go back here. Okay, non-binding, there we go. And then I'll exit. I think there are several of you from Pittsfield. And for those of you, most of which is in Trish Farley Bouvier's district, and there are two non-binding propositions on your ballot. A non-binding question or proposition is almost like a poll in that it asks your legislator to initiate action on a particular area, and it's not binding. It doesn't force them to, and it doesn't make anything a force of law. So it's almost like a poll or to show what voter sentiment is. 5, which again, for those of you who aren't in Pittsfield, you'll never see it. Shall the representative for this district be instructed to vote for legislation to create a single payer system of universal health care that provides all Massachusetts residents with comprehensive health care coverage, including the freedom to choose doctors and other healthcare professionals, facilities and services, and eliminates the role of insurance companies in healthcare by creating an insurance trust fund that is publicly administered. Proposition 6 is a State House transparency call shall the representative from this district be instructed to vote in favor of changes to the applicable House of Representatives rules to make each legislator's vote in that body's legislative committees publicly available on the legislature's website. And that's all she got.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much for that review, Lucy. Are there any questions or nonpartisan comments? What an excellent review.
Yes, thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, the liquor one was the really hard one because I couldn't figure out who was doing what.
I'm surprised that my New York friends and Connecticut friends aren't lobbying me.
On question 1, is that amount of $1 million just hard and fast? Why did they pick $1 million?
Hold on, I'm going to have to take this because I'm dealing with an insurance thing. So
that's ironic.
A little. I'm sorry, what was the question, Ramel? My apologies.
Yeah, is the $1 million on question 1? How did they come up with that amount?
You know, if I had to guess, it's just that it's you know, maybe it's in some other states, or maybe it just makes a wonderful bumper sticker. I mean, who wouldn't like taxing millionaires? I mean, it sounds, you know, everybody loves that. I don't know. I don't know what the number was. It's a very small percentage of the population, obviously.
Lucy, wasn't it, isn't there something like 17,000 people?
There you go again, Marietta. I said small percentage of the population. That's as far as I'll go.
And so I was giving you a number that I'd read. Okay.
They know how many people they're going to tax, I think.
Yeah, they do.
Oh. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, again, I was just wondering why don't
claims,
they make it?
I think it's important to note the claims pro and con cancel each other out. So without
the Eagle, when they reviewed it, noted that the state legislature does set the taxes, and that they have dubbed this progressive tax. And so this should be legislated. And they said that about each of the ballot questions. Correct.
None of these are things that, particularly 4, which was passed in the legislature and should have been law. I mean, again, I don't mean to say pro or con, but just the sequence is that it was passed, it was vetoed, and the veto was overridden. So one has to say, well, why are we voting on it?
Yeah.
And the answer is that, you know, somebody had the wherewithal to go through the process necessary to get it on the ballot.
And that process is something that how to put a ballot question on the ballot is one of the questions we're going to be presenting. And there have been other questions that have come up on this ballot. For instance, what's a governor's council member do? And so this chapter, as a relatively new chapter, unlike our cohorts to the north, we find lots of questions when we read the ballot this year. How did these questions get here? And what is a governor's council? Both of which.
I mean, it's not just, you're right, it's not just how do we vote on them, but why am I voting on them at all?
Thank you. Well, thank you, Lucy, very much for that presentation. Thank you for the participation by so many people. This is a big turnout for us, and we hope that next time we have a meeting, we attract you back. And if you are not a member of a league, do consider joining because we work on a very thin, if anything, just a wisp of air is how we keep going. I guess they call that a wing and a prayer. And all the memberships we can get help make a difference to support our rights to vote, which seem like we should take them for granted, but in fact, there are challenges every day that we read about across the country. And our local chapter connects to the Massachusetts chapter, which connects to the US chapter, and they tend to funnel the fuel towards the problems around the country, which is good to know. Are there any other comments to make this evening? Thank you all for being here, and happy trails to the polls.
Good to see everybody. Bye all.
Bye.
Thank you for hosting, Lucy.
Thank you, Lucy.